Welcome and thank you very much everyone visiting this tutorial. This tutorial is an extension. It is a second part of the many tutorials of the course Introduction to Development Management. And in the previous part of the tutorial we have discussed about social development. And to those of you who attended the first tutorial of the course, the first part, you can find it in my channel, and we discussed about the general meaning of development. And one thing that is a silent feature of development is its multidimensionality. We said that development is a multidimensional, and it can be interpreted in terms of social development, economic development, political development, environmental development, cultural development, gender development. And in the previous tutorial we discussed about social development. This time around is the discussion, the point of discussion is economic development. Dear students, in your literal understand, I would like to ask you a question, and the question is, you literal understand what characteristics are typically associated with economic development in your literal understanding. Okay, write down a list of features that in your view might distinguish an economically developed country from one that is not. Okay, therefore I am asking you to write down, before you get deep into the tutorial, write down, okay, the meaning of the economic development that you literally know, okay, in your mind. Write them into the piece of paper, and then you can compare with the meaning of the economic development in scholarly terms, and this will help you to widen your understanding about economic development. And also divide the countries into two: developed countries and non-developed countries, and write the characteristics of the developed countries and the characteristics of underdeveloped countries. And then when we get into the discussion, then you can compare and contrast between the two countries, and then understand two groups of the countries, and understand development in a wider perspective. To start with, traditionally from the economic point of view, development means achieving a sustained rate of growth. From the economic point of view, development means achieving a sustained rate of growth. In a sense, continuous rate of growth. Okay, the growth of 1 year, growth of 2 years cannot be termed as economic development, cannot be called economic development. Rather, a sustainable, a continuous rate of economic growth is said to be economic development. Therefore, at least 5 years of economic growth, okay, when a country achieves 5 years of economic growth, then it can be termed that this country is in the process of economic development. Therefore, when there is continuous, when there is a non-stopping, at least for 5 years growth of the economy in a given country, we could call it as economic development. Each sector of the economy, and to know about economic growth, first we need to have reports of the different sectors: agricultural sector, manufacturing sector, export sector, import sector. There are different sectors in the economy, and in order to know about the economic growth of a given country within a given year, then we need to have the annual data on the incomes, expenditures, and investments of all sectors. And using the data, economists measure economic growth in terms of gross domestic product or related indicators such as gross national income or gross national product or gross national income. Okay, therefore what is important here is that it is about knowing the growth of a country, and to know the growth of the country there should be data on the hand, and that data comes from each sector of the economy. And once the data come onto our hand or onto the hand of the economists then measure it in terms of gross domestic product or gross national product or gross national income. And when we say gross domestic product, it is the total market value of the goods and services, finished goods and services, mind you, finished goods and final goods and services produced by a country's economy within a year, within a year, by by either the citizenship of the owners of the goods and services doesn't matter. The citizenship doesn't matter. For example, let me take an example, and the gross domestic product of Ethiopia included the total market values of finished goods and services owned by both citizens of the country and by the foreigners. The citizenship doesn't matter. Chinese citizens, goods and services, USA citizens, goods and services, Japan's citizens, goods and services located in Ethiopia would be calculated as would be included in the calculation of the gross domestic product of Ethiopia. Therefore, in the case of calculating gross domestic product for a particular country, citizenship doesn't matter. What matters is that the location of the goods and services should be within the boundary of that country. And gross domestic product includes all final goods and services, that is, those that are produced by the economic agents located in that country, owned by both the country's citizens and foreigners. Economic agents means economic organizations, economic institutions. Can be companies, can be factories, can be service organizations, financial institutions. Economic agent, any organization, any enterprise that makes profit. That produces or delivers, produce goods or delivers service. Therefore, what I want you to take with yourself is, in the case of GDP calculation, gross domestic product calculation, citizenship doesn't matter. What matters is the location of goods and services. The location of goods and services must be within the boundary of that country. On the other hand, gross national product, or GNP, includes the total values of all final goods and services produced by resources owned by that country's residents, whether located in the country or outside the country. It is also called a cross-national income. The trick here is that in the case of cross-national product, I took example of Ethiopia, and I've said in the case of cross-domestic product, all the final goods and services located within Ethiopia, regardless of citizenship, would be included in the calculation of gross domestic product of Ethiopia. But in this case, in gross national products case, the resources owned by the US citizens, the resources owned by the Japan citizens, the resources owned by the Chinese citizens in Ethiopia would not be a part of the calculation of the gross national product of the country. Thus will be deducted. And only the resources, the goods and services owned by Ethiopians inside their country or somewhere else in other part of the world would be included in gross national product. Therefore, goods and services owned by Ethiopians in USA, goods and services owned by Ethiopians in China, all goods and services owned by Ethiopians in Kenya, all goods and services owned by the Ethiopian citizens in South Africa would be included within the calculation of gross national product of Ethiopia. Dividends, citizens who Ethiopian citizens who own dividends, who get dividends from outside, maybe from Kenya, maybe from Uganda, somewhere else, from somewhere else in other parts of the world, their dividends would be included in gross national product. Interest, profits earned by citizens of the country outside the country are counted in GNP of the country. Look, you can here draw the difference between gross domestic product, the gross national product, and gross national product and gross national income are the same. Okay, there is a technical difference, and you can read and understand from here. For example, it is when the country gets positive net income on FDI or foreign direct investments, it will be included in GNI, but not in GDP. Therefore, the difference between GDP and GNP is clear. You can read and understand. Okay, gross domestic product or gross national income divided by the country's population yields per capita income. Okay, thus income per capita refers to the total national income divided by the total population. Therefore, when the market value of the goods and services within the boundary of the given country is summed up together, that gives gross domestic product. And when the goods and services owned by the citizens of the country, both inside and outside the country, it gives a gross national income. And when we divide the total gross domestic product and a gross national product for the total population of the country, it gives income of every individual, and it is the income of that every individual that is termed as per capita income in the language of economics. The language of economics, the total national income in the form of either GDP or GNP divided by the total population of the country yields income per individual, and that income per individual is technically called per capita income. Economic development, therefore, aims at enabling a given country to sustainably expand its output. Therefore, it is when there is continuous increase, when there is continuous expansion, when there is continuous progress, okay, increment in GDP or GNP at a faster rate than the growth rate of the population of a particular country, then that is said to be economic development. Okay, economic development. And here you can see the calculation of the formula. Okay, the formula structure of GDP per capita. GDP per capita is equals to total, gross domestic product divided by total population. GNP per capita, on the other hand, the same structure of the formula. GNP divided by total population. It gives income per individual. However, there are a range of arguments, okay, regarding economic development. We say that economic development, okay, is when there is sustainable or continuous growth of GDP per capita or GNP per capita or GDP or GNP. But there are a range of arguments, and the argument is start from the fact that some propose that if the growth of GDP or GNP, GNI or per capita income is not sustainable, it is not economic development, but rather economic growth. Therefore, be careful when a country achieves GDP increment, okay, or GDP growth for 1 year or 2 years, even for 3 years, it would not be economic development. It would be economic development if and only if it sustains this growth for at least 5 years. 5 years and more. Okay, when economic development, when economic growth in terms of GDP, in terms of GNP or GNI or per capita income continues for at least 5 years and more, then this could be termed as economic development. So sustainability matters, continuity matters, steadity matters. The growth of GDP, the growth of GNP should be steady, non-stopping for at least 5 years. But when the progress for, if the GDP increment is for 2 years or for 1 year or 3 or 4 years, then that is economic growth. If it grows for 3 years and then it stops, if it grows for 2 years and then it stops, then that is economic growth. Okay, not economic development. Economic growth is an increment in a country's output for a year or a short period, not for a long period of time. Okay, it can be increment of country's output for a year, or even for 6 months, or it can be for 2 years, for 3 years. Okay, for economic development to be economic development, at least 5 years is required, according to conservative economists. According to this argument, okay, therefore the argument is that if growth is not sustainable, it is not economic development. And according to this argument, what differentiates developed countries from underdeveloped countries or developing countries is the sustainability of the GDP or GNI growth. Conversely, the GDP, GNP, GNI or per capita income growth in underdeveloped or developing countries is nowhere sustainable. Therefore, this argument states that what makes difference between developed and developing countries is the sustainability of their economy or of their economic growth. And in other words, it means that the economy of the developed countries is growing sustainably, and the opposite is true for the developing countries. Some others, another fashion of the argument is some others argue that even a sustainable growth of GDP or GNP, GNI or per capita income is not a guarantee for economic development, especially when the levels of the living of the mass people remain unchanged. Okay, look, interesting, right? Another scholars argue that even sustainable growth of GDP, GNP or GNI or per capita income is not a guarantee for economic development, especially when there is unfair distribution of resources, especially when there is unfair distribution of the wealth among citizens in a particular country, when few preside over the resources of the country, few individuals control over the resources of the country, and the GDP grows from time to time. GDP increases from time to time. That is not economic development, because it develops just in the hand of the few, not coming to the hands of the vast majority of the people, and consequently the living standard of the people remains unchanged. And when the living standard of the vast majority of the population remain unchanged and the GDP grows sustainably, still that is not economic development. Therefore, look the argument. The first argument is that it should be sustainable, so that the growth of GDP, GNP, GNI or per capita income should be sustainable, and it will be economic. It would be economic development. But here, in the second argument, it says that even sustainable growth of GDP or GNP, GNI or per capita income is not a guarantee. Especially, therefore, what matters is the distribution, how the resource is distributed. Is the resource, fairly distributed? Is the resource equitably distributed? Is everyone getting his own share according to his ability, according to his capability? Is a question that must be addressed, not just a numerical increment of the GDP or GNP, GNI or per capita income. The point is that, let me take a little latitude and explain it more. GDP, when let us assume there are 5 billionaires in a given country, and the goods and services owned by those 5 billionaires would be summed. okay, will be added together and divided to the vast majority of the population who have nothing on their hand, who cannot fulfill their basic necessities. And the GDP per capita is larger, and it can be it is translated as the country's economy is growing. But when you look into it critically, the growth of the per capita income came from what? From the billionaires, from the 5 billionaires who presided over, who controlled over, sorry, who controlled over the vast portion of the country's resource. Okay, therefore, what matters is the living standard of the majority of the population. It is not about dividing the wealth of others to those who are poor, and then call the mere numbers of GDP increment as economic development. This argument is not based on idle speculation or hypothetical suggestion. It is rather based on real-world experience. And those who posit the second argument are not arguing like that without reason. They base their argument on the real-world experience. And we will be looking into it. The world has experienced such a scenario wherein GDP or GNI per capita income increased for countries, but the vast majority of the people still suffered from poverty. We will be looking into it more. Let us proceed. But there is again another short point of argument, and thus arguers in this category say that even though the resource of the country is presided over by the controlled by the few, okay, still there is no problem. Okay, few can preside over the resource of the country, and still there is no problem, because the wealth will drop to the poor. Okay, the wealth owned by the rich, by the richer section of the society, will trickle down or to drop down to the poorest section of the society. Okay, they stress that even though the few have owned the largest portion of the wealth, there is a trickle down to the poor, and trickle down concept is a very notable concept in the field of economics and development. And economic trickle down is understood in terms of investors or rich citizens paying government taxes, employment opportunities, and market stabilization, among others. Look, here the trickle down effect is there are few who preside over the resource of the country, and they have more wealth, and when they own the largest portion of the resource of the wealth of the country, they create jobs with this wealth. When they invest, okay, they invest, and when they invest, they establish companies, factories, institutions, okay, and thus institutions, thus investments will create jobs. And when jobs are created, a low skilled workers will be hired in their economic agencies, and then as the investment is expand, workers get paid, because they will gain a higher pay. And another way that the richer people, okay, the richest people can help the economy is that through higher spending, okay, because they invest. When they invest, they have to buy raw materials. They have to buy different requirements for their investment, okay, the materials from those poor section of the society, and then they increase the demand in the market, okay, and when they are when the demand increases in the market, they will buy a lot, and when they buy, they pay taxes. Government will collect taxes on it. On the investment, government increase taxes, and in both cases the richest section of the society increase tax revenues of the government, and because of the high spending and increased demand for the goods and services from the richest section of the society and the market demand, there is a multiplier effect of increased spending. Okay, multiplier effect in a sense, when the poorest section of the society sell their material to the raw material inputs to the richer section of the society, they will get enough money, enough income, so that they can afford their living, they can afford their health expense, and all this. Therefore, the point is that economic trickle down, as far as economic trickle down is there, the control of the resource of the country by few individuals is not the problem. It's an argument, and it gives sense. Okay, when there is let us say a few individuals, like 5 or 10 individuals are billionaires in a given country, and they presided over the resource of the country, they controlled over the vast portion of the country's wealth, and when they invest, they increase the taxes, and when the government collect a large amount of tax from the richer section of the society, it's going to invest in infrastructures like electricity, like education, like health, and even market stabilization. Those rich people, they supply finished goods to the market, and then they can stabilize them in different ways, employment opportunities or higher spending. There is the spillover effect. The spillover effect is economic development, and the control of the resource by the few doesn't matter. Is the heart of the argument of this in this category. If the largest portion of the wealth in the country belongs to a few without trickling down to the poor, the GDP or GNP rate only represent a very numbers that cannot demonstrate the true living of the majority of the country's people. Mind you, when few individuals preside over the resource of the country without trickle down, then what will happen? Only the resource will be summed and divided to the total population of the country, only increases, which only increases the GDP per capita, or only increases GDP or GNP. And this number will be fake, without trickle down. It means that the vast majority of the people would continue to struggle living. But because of their resource, because of their wealth, because of the wealth of the few, the GDP is increasing, the GNP is increasing, the GNP per capita is increasing, the GDP per capita is increasing from time to time. Maybe, the people, on the other hand, people are dying from starvation, people are dying from hunger. There is no trickle down from, maybe they are taking, their money for job creation, If that is the case, then economy without trickle down is the economy of the few, and the vast majority of the people would continue to struggle. The people's living remains unchanged despite the growth of GDP, GNP, GNI, or per capita income. If there is no trickle down, this kind of phenomenon was observed in the 1950s and 1960s, the period in which developing countries met the targets of economic growth, increasing GDP, GNP, GNI, or per capita income without changing the living of the vast majority of the people. 1950s and 1960s were the years wherein, was the period wherein the African countries got their independence, and during that time, the new governments, the governments of independence across African countries, were investing with funds from the former colonizers, and with the resources from with the primary resources from the agricultural sector of the country. And it seemed for a short period of time, it seemed the GDP, GNP, or GNI, or per capita income is increasing, but later on we will see what happened. Despite an increased level of GDP or GNP, GNI or per capita income in those countries, you know, there was no improvement, and it was little if any, and even in some cases actual decline was observed. Equality and the real income of the bottom 40% of the population become worsened, and despite GDP increased, GNI or per capita income increased, the countries were struggling. This was because there was no trickle down. The resource was controlled just by the few, and they are not creating jobs for the vast majority of the population. They are not paying the required amount of taxes to the government. Okay, and then the spillover effect is underdevelopment. Hence, in terms of reducing poverty, inequality, and unemployment, they were not developing. As a result, the countries failed to tackle poverty, failed to tackle inequality between rich and poor, and failed to create jobs for the vast majority of the population. And they were not developing in that respect. Instead, there was widespread solid poverty, inequitable income distribution, and rising unemployment. This is what was observed in 1950s and 1960s. The arguers hence make their point that there is something wrong with the definition of economic development in mere growth of GDP, in only growth of GDP, GNP, or GNI, or per capita income. Okay, they questioned the definition of economic development in terms of these parameters of economic development. They said thus GDP, GNP, GNI, or per capita income do not show the real living status of the vast majority of the population. There is no trickle down. Okay, the economy was controlled by few, and the vast majority of the population is struggling. So there is a problem with the definition of economic development in terms of those parameters. Consequently, in 1970s, okay, the period 1970s has seen a redefined meaning of development. 1970s economic development was redefined, and it was redefined in terms of reduction or elimination of poverty, inequality, and unemployment. Therefore, the question is, what the country is doing in relation to poverty, what the country is doing in relation to inequality, what the country is doing in relation to unemployment. It's not about a numerical increment of GDP, GNP, GNI, or per capita income. Rather, what is happening in the reduction or elimination of poverty, what is happening in terms of inequality reduction, what is happening in terms of reducing unemployment. What the question that economists and policymakers of 1970s tried to raise about economic development. The economists and the policymakers of 1970s acutely demanded the fair distribution of resources resulting from the growth of GDP, GNP, GNI, or per capita income among citizens. They asked about fair distribution, and there were demonstrations throughout different African countries, throughout countries of Southeast Asia, throughout the countries of South America, and the slogan of the demonstrations was redistribution from growth, redistribution from GNP growth, redistribution from GDP growth. Redistribution was as a center, okay, was as a center of the quest of the public. Okay. However, in 1980s and 1990s, the situation became worsened. Even the slogan redistribution from growth didn't achieve anything. And in 1980s and 1990s, the situation became worsened as GNI growth rate turned negative for many. In 1970s, the public cost of redistribution from growth was raised while GDP was increasing. At that time, At least GDP was increasing. But in 1980s and 1990s, it became worse, and even the GNI turned it negative for many developing countries. Their government is facing facing increase in foreign debts, cut back their economy, their already limited social and economic programs. They established their economic programs, economic investments, social investments. They get into trouble. Economic recession. The living of the people severely deteriorated. Saving and investments declined, and unemployment increased. No distribution from growth achieved, and nothing was reaped from the independence from colonialism in terms of economy. Okay, priorly colonialism was taken as a pretext for poverty, for deteriorated living standard of the people, but even after independence, nothing positive. Rather, negative economic recession was observed. The spillover effect was underdevelopment, thereby poverty. Okay, it was underdevelopment. Okay, the spillover effect was underdevelopment, thereby poverty. Okay, therefore, in 1980s and 1990s, the world people in the developing society faced many challenges. This evidences that GDP, GNP or GNI, or per capita income growth back in 1950s and 1960s become unsustainable, and for it has not aimed at changing the living of the vast majority of the people. The country's dream for economic development has perished. Okay, therefore, the mere reason that GDP is increasing, the mere fact that GDP is increasing, GNP is increasing, GNI is increasing, per capita is increasing, doesn't guarantee economic development, as it was said in 1950s and 1960s. 1950s and 1960s was a period wherein GDP extremely increased, GNI extremely increased, per capita income extremely increased. But later on, 1950s and 1970s, it seemed just wealth in the hand of few and nothing trickling down to the society. But later on, it even started to evaporate from the hands of the wealthy people. Even the wealthy people start to lose their economy, to lose their wealth, resource. So the meaning of economic development in terms of GDP is not a guarantee for economic development. Once again, in 2000s, GDP, GNP, GNI, or per capita income growth throughout the developing countries, Africa, Southeast Asia, and Latin America become rapid. Okay, the trend. It started to increase, but it started to increase not just because the economy has shown structural adjustment. The economy has shown structural changes. Okay, maybe it was growing because the West pumped money in terms of grant, in terms of borrowings for the countries of those developing countries. Therefore, the point that we are raising is that GDP, GNP, GNI, per capita income can show advancement or increase in economic growth, but they cannot guarantee economic development. Rather, what should be seen to evaluate the economic development of a given country is to look at the living standard, is to look what is happening in terms of poverty reduction, what is happening in terms of inequality reduction, what is happening in terms of unemployment, what is happening in terms of health service, what is happening in terms of people affording their health expenditure, what is happening in terms of people affording their education expenses, what is happening in terms of people fulfilling their basic needs should be the parameters and elements of evaluating economic development. Okay. In general, In generic terms, economic development is characterized among other things, by the sustainable growth in the following indicators: increased productivity level. Okay, productivity should increase. Continuous and sustained increase in industrialization process. Okay, industrialization should be there, and there should be sustainable, continuous. High income per capita for most of the inhabitants. High level of consumption of goods and services. The low percentage of number of people active in the labor force occupying in the primary sectors. Primary sector means agricultural sector. There should be a low percentage of people participating in the agricultural sector, and the vast majority of the people should be in the sector of the manufacturing and service sector. Okay, in the sector of manufacturing and service. Diversification of productive sectors. High standard of living for most of the population. Significant advance in the areas of science and technology. Increase in exports. Okay, those are the indicators of economic development. And a developed economy should be inclusive. One thing that you should be clear with: a developed economy should be inclusive. An inclusive economy is one in which there is expanded opportunity for more broadly shared prosperity, especially for those facing the greatest barriers to advancing their well-being. Okay, there should be inclusive economy is wherein opportunities are expanded. Okay, 5 characteristics of inclusive economy: participation. Okay, participation. But people are able to participate fully in economic life and have greater say over their future. People are able to access and participate in markets as workforce, consumers, and business owners. Transparency around and a common knowledge of rules and norms allow people to start a business, find a job, or engage in markets. Technology is more widely distributed and promotes greater individual and community well-being. Another characteristic is equity. More opportunities are available to enable upward mobility for more people. Okay, so that many people can able to move upward. Okay, when they are given opportunities. All segments of the society, without any discrimination, especially poor or socially disadvantaged groups, are able to take the advantage of those opportunities. Inequality is declining. Okay, the gap between the poor and the rich section of the society should converge. Okay, should get narrow and narrow from time to time. People have equal access to a more solid economic foundation, including equal access to public goods, services, and infrastructure such as public transit, education, clean air, and water. Inclusive. Okay, this is another characteristics of the inclusive development is equity. And the third is growth. There should be a growth. Okay, an economy is increasingly producing enough goods and services to enable broad gains in well-being and greater opportunity. Is another silent characteristics of inclusive economy. Good job and work opportunities are growing and incomes are increasing, especially for the poor. Economic systems are transforming for the betterment of all, including and especially poor and excluded communities. Economic growth and transformation is not only captured by aggregate measures of economic output such as GDP, but must include and measured by other outcomes that capture overall well-being, including inequality, poverty, okay, and the like. Stability. Another third characteristics of inclusive economy. Individuals, communities, business, and the governments have a sufficient degree of confidence in future. Stability is about future. Okay, when people should feel confident that after 10 years or after 15 years, even after 30 years, they are still safe. Okay, and an increased ability to predict the outcome of their economic decisions. Okay, therefore, when someone is investing, he or she need to be confident that my investment will survive for long, and I can pass my investment to my children, to my generation, to my next generation. Therefore, this is stability. Okay, this is stability of the economy. Okay, the durability. Okay, the durability of the investment is the security current of the investment. Individuals, households, communities, and enterprises are secure enough to invest in their future. Okay, economic systems are increasingly resilient to shocks and stress. Inflation may come. Okay, droughts may come. Okay, crisis may come, and the economic system should be able to safeguard the economic agents in a given economy and sustain them. This is another characteristics of inclusive economy, especially to disruptions with disproportionate impact on poor and vulnerable communities. Another characteristics of inclusive economy is sustainability. Economic wealth is sustained over time, persists over time, thus maintaining intergenerational well-being. Okay, the economic wealth should pass from generation to generation without disruption. Economic wealth is the entire set of assets that contribute to human well-being, including human produced and natural capital. Human produced in a sense, manufactured, financial, human, social, and natural also. Thus are the economic wealths, and thus economic wealths should be sustained. In the case of natural capital, human must preserve or restore nature's ability to produce the ecosystem of the goods and services that contribute to the whole human well-being. The proper utilization of natural capital is another aspect of inclusive economy. Economic development should not improperly consume natural capital. Decision making must incorporate the long-term costs and benefits, not merely the short-term gains of human use for full asset base. Therefore, economic development involves about utilizing resources, natural resources, in such a way that considers the utilization of the resource in the next generation. To sum up, developed economy is characterized as follows. Okay, there is high income, as you see. There is high human development rank, service sector domination. The economy, the large part of the economy should be dominated by the service sector. Technological advancement, high level of infrastructural development, just characterizes economic development.